We're the book friends that think good.
What does this mean for our life, for our world? Yiggity yeet, my dude. I'm happy to speak. Always happy to think.
I don't know how to do that. I can look into that.
Makes you sound like a book friend that can think good.
It's Jack and it's Weston.
BFTTGs. Yeah.
Jack, I think good. Sometimes I good think, too.
Makes you sound pretty good.
We might want to make it more concise. We are going to attempt to grapple and answer 3 questions. Number 1, what did we learn? Number 2, what did we disagree with? And number 3, what are we going to do about it? I am ready to roll.
I'm in it. Weston, my book friend, tell me, what book is it that we're thinking good about today?
Today, we are talking about Chapter 12, The Law of Least Effort.
Not trying very hard.
Being lazy AF.
Yeah, okay, right from the get-go. 2 thoughts. First of all, much better title. Makes sense. It actually describes what he's talking about. And absolutely is the thing that this chapter is about. Basically, Clear's whole point in this chapter is make things easy. And that is the 3rd law. So how do you do that? Follow the law of least effort, which is what? Take out all of the complexity in a thing and streamline it so that it's as simple as it can possibly be for you to do. The opening of the book, he talks about Daniel Steele's, not Daniel Steele, Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, for way too long, in my opinion, about farming and like how continents are shaped and how,
I don't know, but I guess I didn't take away a lot from that because we just read Sapiens, so I felt like that there was a lot of overlap there.
That's true. There was. I mean, the point is, like, he talks about the shape of the continents and the fact that because America is long and skinny and it has a bunch of different climate zones, that it's hard to farm. So that's why they didn't build robust empires there, but they did in Europe.
Which, like, I don't know. I kind of just disagreed with that claim. What about you?
Man, I don't know. Like, historically, maybe that's true. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say because, like, in the modern world, after America was, like, colonized by the British Empire, and the Spanish Empire, like, now this doesn't really make sense, but I guess it does in terms of human development and civilization development, right? Like Rome and the Akkadian Empire, both massive empires, probably the first empires, were both kind of, I don't know, longitudinally equitable, or is it latitudinally equitable, right? But I don't know. But then China, right? Like, China is a massive area that was ruled by dynasties that stretched north to south and shared variable climates. So, yeah, I don't know about that claim.
Yeah, I don't know. I just Googled it just to see, and, like,
I just didn't feel. I'll just open with pushback. I just didn't feel like this was the best example for this chapter.
I agree. That's how I felt too. I was like, it seems kind of off topic, and but, like, I mean, I get where he's going. Where I think just his main point that he was trying to get across was that it was easier to farm in similar. It was easier for the knowledge to pass. Of how to farm similar crops because the climate was similar in a temperate zone, or a similar temperature throughout the year, similar seasons, because they were on the same latitude line, whereas that wasn't as prevalent. I mean, especially in South America. North America, I think, is pretty wide where that was, we had the Great Plains in the middle of the country, so that's why I kind of had a disagreement there. But I do think his general point of it's easier to transfer knowledge in similar contexts rather than in different contexts.
Well, and he's talking about thinking about expansion or conquering land or whatever. Like, the truth is, our real motivation is to be lazy and do what is convenient. That's his point on page 151. Yeah. Definitely my first learning, which is like, we're motivated to do what is easy. It's something that I know in myself because I do this. Like
Do
when I
you?
sit,
Do you? Because
I think so.
I don't know, thinking about you, I didn't write a note on this, but thinking about you, dude, I mean, come on, man. We talked about that Corinthians class a few episodes ago. And if there's one thing that I thought of you as a student, which again, this is this was my perspective as an admitted lazy student, was I thought a few times when I first met Jack, man, this dude is working harder, not smarter. I thought that, dude.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I maybe have some pushback to your self-assessment.
Yeah, no, that's true. I do have a tendency to maybe do that. Probably it's more of a quantity issue than it is a
Yeah, yeah.
like I just do too much.
Yeah, I would agree with that, dude. You've always been one that which I mean, is fantastic. It seems like you've
Yeah.
always had a bigger capacity than me to just like do more things, which is I've always admired you for that. But
Yeah.
don't call yourself lazy, bro. You've never been lazy as long as I've known you. You've never I'm the better example of that.
I learned something in my leadership class in college that I found really interesting. The professor made this point. He said, uh, the highest level, highest function leaders are lazy. He said, a general is lazy. A lieutenant is active. And because he makes the point, like a lieutenant has to earn their stripes. They have to like prove themselves. They have to constantly, earn approval. And also their schedule is not entirely their own. So they just do whatever the general tells them to do, but then they enact it and they move it around and stuff like that. Generals, on the other hand, are lazy because they delegate everything that they possibly can so that they have more time to think, which allows them to act on the most important things. I thought that was a really interesting leadership principle. And as I've stepped into the workforce and worked in various companies and also churches and all kinds of places, nonprofits I've worked with, I have found this to be true. The most effective leaders, ones who do well, they embrace this laziness. They do what he says on page 153. Rather than trying to overcome the friction in your life, you reduce it.
Yeah. I think that's a key difference for how I conceptualize it because I don't really like the word lazy. I think there's a really big negative connotation with that.
Yep.
And I don't think it's lazy. I think it's delegation and like resource allocation where it goes back to a few chapters ago when we were talking about trying to build in or like the automaticity of things builds freedom, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's more what managers and leaders and those sorts of people are trying to do. And that's from an education lens, that's what I try to do in my class. I tell my kids from the beginning of the year, I'm like, hopefully by the end of the year, you don't even need me to do anything, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't view myself as the be all end all in my classroom. I view myself as the person who gives you the opportunities and guides you, my students, to become more independent because I think that that's generally what we want, what our leaders should want us to do. They want us to be independent in our roles, right?
Yeah.
And we feel the best, or at least I have in my experience, I feel the best when I feel I have autonomy. And if we're feeling micromanaged by the people above us, man, I get super negative when I start to get micromanaged about stuff. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, like I feel like I
Yeah.
don't get trusted.
Yeah.
I feel like, well, if they're not going to let me try and do it my way or do it my way that I know works, I'll do it their way and it'll suffer. It won't be as great. The quality won't be as good. And
Yes.
I apply that to my students as well, where I'm like, look, if I'm trying to tell you exactly how to do every little thing, then you're not going to enjoy the process. You're not going to actually like learn it because you're just going to learn what I want you to do. So I tend to try and make my students more independent. And
Yeah.
that is something that I think every educator needs to consider and think about. That the best teachers become useless.
Yes.
Like the best teachers, the
Yes.
best leaders become invisible.
Yeah.
And
They're always thinking about replacing themselves.
right.
Yeah. Or like, yeah, no, that's a really good point.
To get a specific example of this too that I thought about,
Mhm,
I thought about how throughout the year I'm always telling the kids whenever we run into like a new symbol or a new concept in math that like a common one in fifth grade is exponents. Like the kids have never seen an exponent before, or, whatever. So we introduce that, or they've seen them but they don't really know what they mean. So exponents is a big thing in fifth grade. But anyways, so like when I'm introducing that stuff, I always tie it back to how mathematicians are just like us and how they are mathematicians. And the students are always like, "What does that mean? What do you mean?" Initially. And I'm like, "Dude, they're lazy. Just like you.
mhm.
They're not trying to write it out." So we always write out like the numerical expression and then we write out the what it means in words. And
Mhm.
I'm like, "Which one would you guys rather write if you're doing a lot of math?" And there's this
Yeah.
usually this big eye opening where the students are like, "Oh, duh." And I'm like, and I
Yeah.
say that throughout the year. I'm like, mathematicians are lazy. They're
Yeah.
looking for the shortest way to write it, and they're looking for the fastest way to do it. And you should
Yeah.
be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So
Though,
it's kind of funny that I've used that same terminology before.
yeah. Though we talked about this last time when we talked about the increase in gray matter.
Yeah,
Mathematicians have drilled that stuff.
right.
So they have the flexibility to be able to do that, which I think is one of the foundations for allowing this to happen. Like last time you were vulnerable, so I'll be vulnerable and like share a little bit about myself because you're right. Like your assessment of me is absolutely right. I was working harder, not smarter when I was young with things like leadership, things like school, achieving, right? It was like, oh, I know how I can achieve. I will muscle my way into it. I will outstudy. I will outread. I will stay up late. I
Jack's
will,
playing Survivor out here.
yeah, I'll sacrifice,
Outplay.
yeah, sacrifice fun, sacrifice social, sacrifice, self, right, for the sake of getting ahead. And that is a bad strategy. That creates stress, burnout, anxiety. Like, man, I think about myself in high school sometimes, and occasionally I talk to people who I haven't seen for a long time, and their assessment of me as a person is like, oh, I don't even recognize that person anymore. Like, I was like a stress case because I was trying to muscle my way through everything, and I had the capacity to do it. So it worked. But like just because something works doesn't mean it's the right way to do something. And I've learned a lot about this particular chapter as I've grown as a person. One of my greatest learnings about this was in my master's. I saw a lot of my my friends, like one of the things that people in their masters had learned that I hadn't because I was young. I was like 23 going through my master's, and I was in class with people in their 40s, 30s, people who'd been in like one of my coworkers, or my current co-pastor, he had already been in the professional world for 5 years. So he had learned some things. One of the things that students did is like, they just didn't do some assignments, or they like asked for extensions. And I was like, you can ask for an extension on a paper? I had no idea you could even do that. Never crossed my mind, right? So I kind of got into the habit of doing that because I wasn't finessed at this yet. I hadn't like figured out like reducing friction without removing it. So I just kind of like dropped the ball on some things. Like one class, I just didn't do a major portion of assignments, and I'd like kind of like, just let things slip and stuff. And I went to my Hebrew professor, and that class was combined. It was undergrads and graduates. And undergrads have to be like regimented and like disciplined more than graduate students. So in an all masters class, it's more likely that a professor's like, yeah, take an extension, whatever. You all have families, you all have jobs. I don't care, just get it done. But in this case, he was like, no extent, like I can't do extensions. Like you're a student and you're with these other students where I wouldn't give them an extension. Why would I give you an extension? He said, but here's what I'll do, because he was full of grace. He was a Christian guy, right? He's like, I will give you one extension and then never again, because you are an adult now and adults have to juggle. And to juggle, you have to figure out how many balls you can keep in the air, because you can't drop them, Someday you're going to be married. You're going to have kids. Right now you have a job and you have school. The more balls you add to that equation, the faster you have to learn to juggle, and the more you have to figure out how you can do this.
Or
And
which ones to drop.
yeah, huge. Which ones to drop? How to reduce friction. And so, yeah, I mean, I've just learned a lot about this over the years. You have to constantly balance this act of like, am I putting time in the places I need to? Like if you have a family, and you got to spend time with them, and not just like, I think one of the mistakes that we make is like, oh, there's family time, but like family is a multi-dimensional system. Like I have to have time and space for my daughter, and I have to have time and space for my wife. Like both of those, now that they're both in the equation, family has expanded, and it's important to add even more to that. So I need to reduce friction in the other areas in ways that allows me to keep all of those balls in the air.
Yep. I thought about the friction a lot. I really liked on page 153 his visualization with the hose. And he says, you know, life is coming at you like water through a hose, and sometimes it gets kinked. You can either choose to try and push more water through to get it to where it needs to go, or you can choose to relax the hose, right?
Yeah.
So you can choose to relax yourself, relax the hose, and let it flow through naturally, or you can just try and, like Jack was talking about, try and just keep pushing, and that leads to burnout. And I really like that visualization. I think I'm gonna use that with my students whenever that sort of thing comes up. Like I really like the hose.
Yeah, I like one of the things I thought about that hose analogy that's interesting is just looking at my own garden. If I do that on my hose, there's like kind of a leaky thread at the source. And the interesting thing is if you turned up the water, it wouldn't come out through the end of the hose. It would come out in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Which I thought was just another interesting point is like
that's a good thing. Yeah.
your effort, like if you're trying to muscle something through, you might not end up with the results that you want.
Yeah. You get a hernia.
Right. Yeah. Totally. I mean,
that's what a hernia is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're trying to force something through, and then your gut goes through the muscle instead of,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's like a law of physics, right? Like a system can only take so much pressure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really like too this is a few pages later, but where he's talking about the dude who cleans the toilet and then hops in the shower. Yeah. I was like, that's a habit stack I need to consider. I like that one. I might add that to my habit stack.
Yeah.
Because I'm the toilet cleaner too in our house.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because he's like the best time to clean the toilet is before you shower because you will get dirty.
It makes so much sense, and I've never considered it. Right?
Yeah. Of course, that's an IT guy. Like they're so system based.
Yeah. I guess I'm pretty system based too. So I was like, oh, I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
The whole frictionless thing. I'm gonna put a link to this in the video, in the description. Do you know Cody Co?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. He's kind of a comedy guy. If any of our listeners, fans, watchers out there know Cody Co, I'm gonna link his frictionless video. There's this little clip. He has an interview from a while ago where he mentions the word frictionless like, I don't know, a dozen or so times in a couple minutes, and it's just pretty funny like how often he mentions it. So I was thinking about that meme a little bit. Oh, and then I wanted to ask, I think as this school year is getting to the end, something I want to do in these last few weeks is ask my students from their perspective how we could make our classroom more frictionless for the incoming students, and just see their perspective on it, and maybe think about some ways that I could rearrange the environment to help their learning become more frictionless. That's something I want to try these next few weeks with my students. What about you? What are you going to do about it?
Well, good question. I think for me, one of the big learnings is here's something I've learned personally, and it goes back to what you talked about with micromanaging. I think I recently read this in a different book and found it interesting. They were talking about love, and they were saying love is unconditional, actually. Like, there actually aren't conditions. The condition is trust, but trust is 100% conditional. Trust must be earned, and trust can be lost, And where there is no trust, it's very difficult to love. I thought that was a really interesting principle that is something that's really worth thinking about. And I thought about micromanaging also. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that these are two areas where we create friction for ourselves. As a worker, it's in seeking approval. So like always looking for things to be justified, to be approved, to be praised. Like that search for approval is a huge source of friction. And it applies to lots of things. Like a good example, I have two small businesses. I sell art, my cousin's art, and then I design board games. I do this on the side. I could waste a ton of my time asking like, do you guys like this art? Or do you like this game? Instead, what I should be doing is saying, hey, here's some art that we made. Here's a game that I made. What do you think? Right? Like that reduces a lot of friction if I take out the approval search and constantly look for that. Instead, I should be looking at feedback and reiterating, right? Like, oh, people didn't like this particular painting. Let's do more of this because this is selling well, right? That's a huge thing you can do as a worker to reduce friction. And then as a manager, it's micromanaging, constantly verifying. Like if you have, like, take the time on the front end, get the right people in place, and you never have to micromanage them. You just trust that they get the things done. And then your work becomes a lot simpler. It's either, moving things forward with those people, or when things fall apart, then you say, oh, need to find a new person, rather than constantly being like, hey, are you doing the thing I asked you to do? I think the big takeaway for me, the big learning for me, is putting together with this other concept I learned about the conditionality of trust, is to say, how can I improve trust in the areas I'm working so that I can reduce friction?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can be...
Go ahead.
That can be like self-trust, or it can be, outward trust. Like a good example is actually working out, right? Like I can trust the process, and that reduces a lot of friction. Or I can be full of self-doubt and constantly looking for metrics and approval and verification, saying like, hey, I'm running. Am I running enough? Is it working? Like looking at all of the, like my weight, but instead I can just go out and do the run and just trust the metrics will catch up later.
Yep. I think that's a big piece to working out. That it took me a while to get to that too. The paralysis by analysis, I think that happens a lot. I had a perfect example too. I just thought about from my classroom yesterday. I had a student who had to get a new laptop because something weird happened on his laptop. Like the whole operating system crashed, which was weird. But anyways, gave him a new laptop, and everything's like single sign-on now, which is fantastic. Makes everything very smooth. But then he logs on, and then we're doing something. He's like, I don't have this program downloaded. And I was just like, so? And he's like, I was like, you know what it is. You know how to use the search bar, and you know how to download things. Download it. Like, you don't need me to tell you to do that. You already know, like, you've identified the problem, and you know how to solve it. Do it. And it was, and then he was like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. And then within 5 minutes, he was with us in the class. Like, he had downloaded and everything. Like, he didn't need me to do anything, right?
Yeah.
And I was just like a perfect example of what you're talking about, like looking for approval when you don't necessarily need it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
I think another thing is the whole addition by subtraction thing.
Yeah.
I recently bought a new computer. This is a new computer I'm working on. It's a MacBook Pro. My old MacBook Pro was 10 years old. I got it in 2013. Wow. I spent way too long researching computers. What I should have done, this was a mistake. What I did is I started looking at every computer, like every computer under the sun. And I'm like, oh, well, which is better? I have no idea. There's no way to tell. Nobody knows. I went to PC Mag. I asked people who bought computers. I talked to one guy. He's bought 10 computers this year and returned all of them because he wasn't satisfied with them. Because
that's dedication.
Because, well, what's he doing? He's standing at the buffet and starving. Right? Here's what I decided to do. I said, you know what? I'm just going to buy another Apple computer. That reduced my choices to like 3 options. And then it's like, okay, well, I need the best performance at the least cost. That's this. And super simple. Once I made that decision, it was like, oh, I just cut out all of the friction and I made a decision and I'm happy with it.
Can't believe you didn't go for the one with 0.5 more gigabytes of RAM, brah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I still debated. I still sat there and I was like, which of these three should I get? And my wife is like, Jack, there are three, just pick one.
Yeah. Yeah. And with the return policy too, it's like if you really don't like it, you can return it.
Yeah.
You can try again, just like that other guy. Yeah, dude. Paralysis by analysis. But yeah, I think this chapter is a good reminder that we're all lazy and to reduce friction in your life.
Thank you for joining us, book friends. Next week on the BFTTG pod, Jack and Weston, they're thinking good some more with you, our book friends. Check out the show notes or the description, comment section for a link to the book and any articles that we talk about in the show. Bye-bye, book friends.
Bye for this time, guys.
Do a good thing today.
I love you.
Love you too, dude.